Welcome to Creepy Vibes. We're diving into the darkness with 10 true scary horror stories that will make you question what's real and what's lurking just beyond the horizon. But before we begin, here's something strange. Most viewers make one huge mistake. They leave without subscribing, and by doing so, they miss out on the creepiest, spine-tingling tales that only the bravest dare to hear. Don't be one of them. Hit that subscribe button now, because the terror waiting in the darkness is far from over. So, where are you watching from, and what time is it there? Let me know in the comments, because here, the night is only getting started and the horror is waiting to unfold. Now, let's dive into the darkness. 10 true scary horror stories. The walls were bleeding rust. Not real blood, no, but the pipes behind them hissed and leaked iron-tainted water that ran down the plaster like old veins. Edna Mayfield told herself it was nothing. Everything in apartment 3C of the Claremont. Arms was bleeding something. Heat in the winter, cool in the summer, money, patience, time. Edna was 78, thin as a broken broomstick, and quieter than the mice that lived in the ceiling above her. She'd been in that building for over 30 years. When her husband Al passed in '98, she stayed. When the grocery store across the street shut down, she stayed. When the neighborhood changed from decent to dangerous, she stayed. She didn't have anywhere else to go, and she didn't want to die in some retirement home that smelled like bleach and forgotten dreams. So she stayed. It started on a Thursday night in March. Edna was getting ready for bed, house slippers on, hair pinned up, when she walked past the front door and stopped. It was that strange, quiet feeling, like someone had knocked but hadn't used their hand. Just an idea of a knock, soft and far away. She turned and looked at the door. Nothing. No shadows under it, no movement in the peephole glass. Still, she leaned forward and looked through. At first, she saw nothing. The hallway outside was poorly lit, just one flickering bulb that cast more shadow than light. But something in the corner of her eye caught her. She leaned in closer, squinting. There, right at the edge of the peephole's distorted circle, were two dark spots. Not spots. Eyes. Round, glassy, and too wide. She stepped back fast, heart fluttering in her chest like a bird in a cage. When she looked again, the hallway was empty. No eyes, no sound. She didn't sleep that night. The memory of those eyes, too still, too focused, too damn close, stayed with her. She told herself it was her imagination. Maybe she'd leaned in too far and saw her own reflection. Maybe the bulb flickered just right to trick her mind. But the next night, it happened again. Same time. Around 11:43 p.m., give or take, she passed the door on her way to shut off the lights in the kitchenette, and she felt it again, that silent knock. This time she didn't hesitate. She looked through the peephole. The eyes were back. Closer. Now they were dead center in the peephole, staring back at her like they'd been waiting. Wide, dark, and wrong. No whites, no eyelids. Just orbs, black as wet coal. She gasped and stumbled back, grabbing the doorframe to keep from falling. Her bones were too old for panic like that. She stood frozen for a full minute before she dared to look again. Gone. Just the empty hallway and the flickering bulb. On the third night, she didn't even pretend to sleep. She waited in her recliner, an old fleece blanket pulled up to her chin, the TV on mute. When the clock hit 11:42, she shuffled to the door. They were already there. The eyes didn't blink. They didn't move. They were just watching. Edna backed away slowly, went to the kitchen, and picked up the landline. The phone line was dead. She tried her cell phone. No signal. That had been happening more and more lately, but the timing felt personal. Too specific. She didn't tell anyone. Who would believe her? She barely knew the neighbors anymore, and the building super, Carlos, was a teenager with bad tattoos and worse attitude. What would she say? "Excuse me, there are ghost eyes watching me every night from the other side of my door?" The nights stretched on. Everyone the same. Eyes at the peephole, staring. Edna started taping a kitchen towel over it during the day, but every night around midnight, she'd find herself standing at the door, pulling the towel off and looking anyway. She couldn't help it. It was like those eyes were calling to her, whispering without sound, dragging her forward inch by inch. She started hearing things. Not voices, not exactly. More like humming, low and warbling, like someone trying to remember a lullaby underwater. It came from the hallway, always right before she looked. Sometimes she thought she saw shadows under the door. Not feet, shadows, like whatever stood on the other side didn't have a shape that made sense. One night, maybe a week in, she saw something else. A hand, pressed against the door. Not knocking, just resting there. The fingers were long and thin, but too many of them. 7, maybe 8. She didn't count. She ran to her bedroom and locked the door, crying quietly until sunrise. She started keeping the lights on, all of them, even the ones in the closet. She unplugged the microwave because she thought it was listening. She stopped watching the TV. Every reflection, every screen, she thought she might see those eyes staring back. She called her niece in Toledo, tried to explain. The niece offered to come pick her up, but Edna said no. The thing outside wouldn't let her leave. She didn't know how she knew that. She just did. If she tried to open the door, it would be there, not behind it, in it. One night she taped over the peephole, layers of duct tape, thick and tight. She went to bed early, took half a sleeping pill and prayed. It didn't help. At 11:43 p.m. she woke up. The humming was inside the apartment. She didn't move for a long time, just lay there, sweating, clutching the edge of the mattress like a lifeline. Then, slowly, she got up, walked to the front door. The tape was gone. Not torn, not peeled off. Gone. As if it had never been there. And the peephole? It was black. Not like darkness. Like the glass itself had rotted. Melted. She leaned in, her hand trembling, and the eyes were inside, on her side, right behind the glass. She screamed, stumbled backward, and fell. She hit her head on the corner of the radiator, and everything went dark. They found her 2 days later. Dead from head trauma, they said. A fall, an accident, but the door was locked from the inside. And when Carlos came to clean out the apartment, he said he felt weird standing in front of the door, like someone was watching him through the peephole. But when he looked, he didn't see anything. Not at first. But every night since, just around 11:43 p.m., he swears he sees a shape behind the glass. 2 round spots, too wide, too dark, and getting closer. Every night. It started with a squirrel. Or at least that's what Sam told himself. Their new house in St. Paul was nothing fancy. Just a narrow 2-story tucked between 2 larger Victorians, like a forgotten middle child. Built in 1921, it had wood floors that creaked in the corners and a furnace that wheezed like a lifelong smoker. But the bones were good. That's what the real estate agent said. The bones are good. And maybe they were. But bones are still bones. Sam and Aaron had only lived there 6 weeks when they decided to renovate the attic. Not fully, just enough to throw down some insulation, maybe add a little storage space. The place had been empty for years, the floorboards warped, the old insulation pulled out decades ago and never replaced. Just blackened joists, cobwebs, and an occasional dead moth curled up like a dry leaf. Aaron was the first one to hear the whispers. She mentioned it casually one night over dinner. "Did you hear that?" Sounded like someone talking upstairs. Sam looked up from his plate. "What, like the neighbors?" "No," she said, frowning. "From the attic." Sam shrugged. "Probably squirrels or something, scratching around in the rafters." But Aaron didn't look convinced. Squirrels don't whisper. They kept working on the attic. Rolled out fresh pink fiberglass, stapled reflective foam to the walls, sealed up old vents. The house stopped breathing after that. That's how it felt. Like they'd wrapped it too tight, suffocated it in modern insulation. The air got stiller, heavier. At night, the furnace sounded further away, like it was trapped in another house. The whispers came back. Louder now, clearer, like they were moving through the walls, one side of the attic to the other, always just beneath the surface. Erin recorded them on her phone once, but when they played it back, it was just static. She stopped going up there altogether. Said it made her feel sick, like the air changed when she crossed the threshold. Sam didn't believe her, until the night he found the crawl space. It wasn't visible at first, just a sag in the drywall at the far end of the attic, behind where they'd stacked a few bins of holiday decorations and old books. The bulge looked like water damage at first, soft and rounded, but when Sam poked it, it crunched, not wet, hollow. He pulled out a utility knife and cut a clean square, tugging the drywall away like peeling old skin. Behind it was a low, narrow opening, maybe 3 feet tall, just wide enough to crawl into. The air that came out was stale, sweet, and cold. Inside, he found the sleeping bag, old, green, mildewed and crusted with something dry and white. Next to it were Polaroids, hundreds of them, scattered like someone had dropped a box and never picked them up. Sam crawled in further, brushing them aside, heart thudding. The pictures were all of the same room. A bedroom maybe, always the same angle. The bed, the corner, a dresser. Sometimes the lighting changed. Sometimes there was a person standing in the corner. Blurry, always half out of frame. A tall figure, thin, watching. He found the diary beneath the insulation, wrapped. In a flannel shirt stiff with age, the pages were stuck together, some melted into each other like skin after a burn. He flipped to the middle. The handwriting was cramped, desperate. Written in English mostly, but it didn't stay that way. Sentences broke down into symbols. Some looked like letters, others looked like scratches, and some looked like eyes. Over and over, just eyes. Drawn in thick pen, wide open, never blinking. The last full sentence he could read said, "It lives behind the walls. It whispers because it has no mouth." That night, Sam left the crawl space open. He didn't mean to, but he couldn't make himself go back in to seal it. He dreamed of soft voices humming lullabies with no melody, of something crawling beneath the floorboards, leaving trails like worms in damp wood. Erin woke up screaming. Said she saw something staring at her from the vent. Said it didn't have a face, just eyes, dozens of them, blinking, unblinking. The next day, they called a contractor to reseal the attic. He came in the morning, walked up the stairs, and didn't come down for a long time. When Sam finally went to check on him, he found the man standing at the crawlspace entrance, pale and sweating. "There's someone in there," the contractor whispered. "I heard them say my name." He left without doing the job. The whispers changed after that. They became clearer. Words took shape. Not English anymore. Not anything that belonged to this world. But still, Sam understood. He couldn't say how. The meaning bloomed behind his eyes like tumors. They stopped sleeping. They stopped speaking much either. Erin started sitting by the attic door at night, head cocked to the side, listening, smiling. Sam would find her that way sometimes in the dark, just smiling. One night she went in, just walked up, opened the door, and crawled into the space. Sam tried to follow her, but the entrance was gone. Just smooth wall. No seams, no draft. He tore the drywall down, hammered through the joists, ripped up the insulation. Nothing. The crawl space had vanished, but the whispers stayed. Now Sam sits in the attic every night where the entrance used to be, listening, waiting, recording pages of strange symbols in the same notebook he found, drawing eyes, listening for Erin's voice. And sometimes in the walls he hears her laughing. Nobody really retires in Apalachicola. They just slow down, like tides, like blood. That's what the old-timers say. Earl did what they all said he wouldn't. He stopped, After 47 years pulling shrimp, crab, and God knows what else from the Gulf, he hung up his net for good. His shoulders ached, his hands curled like claws in the morning, and his wife, God rest her, had passed the year before. He figured he'd earned the peace. He bought the shack at the end of Bayview Drive, a place nobody wanted. Too close to the water, they said, too exposed during hurricane season. But Earl liked the sound of the surf. It reminded him of her voice. The first morning, he saw the man, just a shape in the shallows, maybe 30 feet out. The tide was coming in and the gulls were just starting to scream. Earl stood on his rickety porch, sipping black coffee, staring at the figure waist-deep in water, not moving, not walking, just standing. Earl squinted, shielding his eyes. No boat, no paddleboard, just the man, pale, thin, and smiling. It wasn't a friendly smile. It was wide, crooked, like the muscles didn't quite know what they were doing. It reminded Earl of dead fish left too long on the deck, mouths frozen open in a final mocking grin. He blinked, looked again. The man was gone. Next day, same time, there he was again, a little closer this time, maybe 20 feet from shore, still not moving, still grinning. Earl felt something then, a heaviness in his chest that had nothing to do with age or grief. It was the kind of weight you get when you reel in something from deep water. Something heavy, something alive, something wrong. By the third morning, the man stood just beyond the sandbar. The grin was wider now. It stretched unnaturally, cutting across his face like someone had carved it there. His eyes were black, bottomless, like the ocean before a storm. Earl didn't drink anymore, not since 2003 when he damn near flipped his trawler trying to navigate drunk through a fog bank. But he thought about it then, thought about it hard. He asked around town. Nobody admitted to seeing anything, just gave him tight smiles and said things like, "You've been out in the sun too long," or "Maybe it's time to move inland." But Earl knew the sea, never let go easy. On the fifth day, Earl woke up to water on the floor. It had seeped in through the front door, which stood wide open despite him locking it before bed. Seaweed clung to the threshold. A trail of wet footprints led from the porch to the kitchen sink and stopped. No one was there. But the smell lingered, salt and rot and something else, something old, the smell of drowned things. Earl nailed the door shut that night, boarded the windows, sat up in the dark with a rusted hunting knife and a failing flashlight, listening to the distant crash of waves. At dawn, he crept outside. The man stood ankle-deep now, on the shore, smiling. Earl felt something run down his leg, warm and sour. He hadn't wet himself since boyhood, but here he was, too scared to be ashamed. The man's skin was gray, stretched thin like old parchment. Sea lice writhed in his eye sockets. Crabs scuttled through the holes in his throat. Still, he smiled. Earl screamed then, threw the coffee mug, ran back inside. But he knew. The man would come closer tomorrow, closer the next. Until he was inside. He tried to leave town. Drove up Route 98 until his truck stalled. No reason, no warning, just stopped. Dead. He hitched back with a teenager heading to Tallahassee who said nothing the entire ride, just stared straight ahead with wide, wet eyes. That night, the porch light turned on by itself, then flickered out. Earl couldn't sleep. He paced, listened, waited. The sixth morning, the man was on the steps. His feet were bloated, skin splitting like sausage casings. Barnacles crusted his calves. His grin stretched ear to ear now, too wide, tearing skin, teeth too perfect, too white, too many. He never moved, just smiled. Earl threw open the door. "What the hell do you want?" he shouted. His voice cracked. "You got something to say? Say it!" But the man said nothing, just stood there, grinning. Earl didn't go back inside, just stood on the porch until the sun rose and the man vanished with the tide, like he'd never been. That night, Earl dreamed of drowning, Not once, but over and over, pulled down by pale hands, kissed by that awful smile. No air, no light, just pressure and silence, and eyes watching from the deep. When he woke, his lungs burned. On the 7th day, there was no man. Earl thought it was over, thought maybe he'd passed some test. Survived something he didn't understand. He laughed, made breakfast, opened every window in the shack and let the breeze in. He didn't notice the wet footprints until he reached the bedroom. They came from the hall, from the kitchen, from the front door. The man was inside. He stood at the foot of the bed, still dripping, still grinning, and this time he spoke, or rather, he opened that awful mouth, and something else spoke through him, a sound like waves crashing in reverse, a voice not meant for ears but bones. Earl screamed until his throat tore, fought, scratched, bit, but no one heard. The shack is still there, windows always open, salt stains on the floors that won't scrub out. Locals avoid it now. Kids dare each other to knock on the door, but none go inside. Sometimes, early in the morning, if you stand by the shore, you'll see a shape out in the water, not moving, not walking, just standing, smiling. And every day, it comes a little closer. Just a crumbling old building tucked between dying oak trees and cracked pavement on the edge of Knoxville. The bell tower leans slightly to the left. The front doors groan like they're in pain every time they open. The roof leaks when it rains. The congregation's down to about 20, mostly old folks who don't smile much and sit in the same pews every Sunday out of obligation or fear. Nobody talks about the room behind the choir loft, but everybody knows it. Locals call it the crying room. It's small, windowless, bare except for a wooden bench and faded wallpaper peeling off the cinder block walls. Tucked away behind a warped door with no knob, just a metal latch, cold too. The touch even in the heat of July. It was meant for fussy children. That's what they say anyway. A place parents could sit with a crying baby without disturbing the sermon. Soundproof, supposedly. But here's the thing. Every child who goes in there screams. Not the tired, hungry kind of crying. Not even the panicked tantrum type. These are screams like something is being torn out of them. High-pitched, inhuman. Like the walls themselves are chewing through skin and memory. Doesn't matter if you sit with them or not. Some say it started in the 1950s. Others swear it goes back further. Maybe the 1800s, before the church was even. Built when the land was still forest and moonlight and strange shapes in the trees. The church records don't say much. The blueprints list the space as Observation Room Number 3, though there's no mention of what it was supposed to observe, and no one remembers who built it. Not the pastor, not the elders, not even old Mr. Cranford, who's 92 and claims he helped lay the foundation with his father in 1946. "I don't think we built that part," he told someone once. "I think it was already there." In 1987, a young mother named Ruthie Ellison brought her son Caleb to service. He was 2, chubby, giggly, and obsessed with toy trucks. When he started fussing halfway through the sermon, Ruthie carried him up to the crying room. She sat with him on the bench and tried to soothe him, but the moment the latch clicked shut, Caleb's face changed. He went quiet, eyes wide, staring at something behind her. Then the screaming began. Ruthie swore he was looking at the wall, not through the window or the door, just the wall, like there was something there none of the rest of them could see. She got out fast. After that, Caleb didn't speak for 2 years, just screamed in his sleep and pointed at blank walls. The church sealed the door for a while, nailed it shut, painted over the seams. But one morning, the door was open again. Not broken into, not kicked down, just open, like it had never been closed at all. The bench inside had moved. In 1993, during a youth choir practice, 10-year-old Marcus Riddle dared another kid to go inside and sit there for 5 minutes alone. He did. His name was Jesse Trent. When they pulled Jesse out, he was convulsing. His nose was bleeding. His ears, too. He never returned to school. Last anyone heard, he was living in a psychiatric care home in Murfreesboro. He hasn't spoken since. The room stays empty now, but it's still there. Behind the choir loft, tucked in the shadow of a cross that nobody prays under anymore. Sometimes, during long, quiet sermons, babies will start crying out of nowhere. Before, their mothers even reach for their bottles or binkies, and always, they look toward the loft. The wallpaper inside that room is old now, moldy, peeling like skin, but under one patch, someone once found scratch marks, long jagged lines like nails or claws or both. Next to them were faded, smeared fingerprints, tiny ones, too small for adults, as if someone had been pounding on the wall from the inside. There's a rumor that if you stand in the crying room with the lights off and press your ear to the back wall, you'll hear whispers, not words exactly. Just the sound of someone trying to speak with a throat full of dirt. One brave soul tried to record it once, a visiting college kid writing his thesis on haunted Christian architecture of the South. He left the recorder in the room for exactly 3 minutes, walked outside, and waited. When he played it back, there was nothing for the first minute, just faint static. Then came the sound of sobbing, then screaming, then a voice, deep and slow, that simply said, "Again." He deleted the file, left town that night, never submitted the thesis. The crying room is still there, no one enters. Not anymore, but the latch still moves on its own. The bench creaks. And if you listen very closely from the pews on a quiet Sunday morning, you can hear someone crying behind the wall. It was the heat that drove me into Amarillo that night. That relentless Texas sun, blistering and unforgiving. It was already pushing midnight, and the rest of the drive through the desert felt like a string of endless black asphalt with nothing to stop and see. My name's Danny Croft, and I've been on the road as a trucker for longer than I care to remember. You can't drive across the country for 32 years without seeing things, places, people that you'd rather forget. But what happened to me in Amarillo is something I'll never shake. The hotel was a shit show, sure, but it was cheap. It was called the Sunset Inn, though there was nothing remotely sunset about it. The sign had a flickering neon bulb that seemed like it had been on the verge of dying for years, but it still hummed a hollow tune in the dead air of the night. The only thing keeping it alive was the promise of a bed and a cold beer, and that was all I needed. I'd been driving too long. I pulled in, the gravel crunching under my tires. A few cars scattered in the lot, not many, and the place smelled like mildew and old dust. I parked, slammed the door shut, and dragged my bag into the lobby. The woman at the desk was exactly what you'd expect from a place like this, an old broad with dark lipstick and hair the color of rotting wheat. She didn't greet me with any kind of warmth, just a flat, "You need a room?" "Yeah," I muttered, tossing my keys on the counter. "Just for the night." She didn't ask my name or anything, just stared at me with cold eyes, scribbled something in a book, and handed me a key that had room 210 written on it. But the key was strange. The numbers had been scratched out and rewritten a few times, as if someone had been trying to erase them. I didn't think much of it. Truckers don't ask too many questions when it comes to motels. "Room 210, she said without looking up. "Upstairs, last room on the right." I nodded, took the key, and made my way up the stairs. The hallway upstairs smelled like sour carpet and stale air, the flickering fluorescent lights barely doing their job. Room 210 was at the end, just past a closed door that should have been room 209. But it wasn't. I stepped into the room and immediately felt the weight of something off. The bed creaked like it had been there since the place first opened. The curtains were tattered, and there was a chill that settled around my shoulders the moment I crossed the threshold. Still, it was a bed, and it was too late to drive any farther. I threw my bag on the bed and flipped the TV on. The static buzzed. For a second before the picture came to life, I didn't even care what was on, just wanted to get a few hours of sleep. That's when the knocking started. It was subtle at first, just a faint, rhythmic sound from the wall behind the bed. Tap, 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 like something small and hollow, tapping against the drywall. At first, I thought it was the pipes, but it was too soft for that. Too deliberate. I ignored it at first, hoping it would stop, but it didn't. Tap, tap, tap. Pause. Tap, tap, tap. Then, the whispering. I froze. The voice came from the wall behind the bed, a deep, rasping sound, like it had crawled out of the grave. It wasn't clear at first, but I thought I heard my name. Dano? My heart skipped. Nobody had called me Dano in years, not since my grandpa. He used to call me that when I was a kid before he died. I sat up in the bed, eyes wide, trying to shake the feeling of dread that was clawing at my throat. The knocking continued, each tap like a hammer hitting bone. Dano, help me, please. I could feel my blood run cold. My childhood nickname. My grandpa's voice, soft and cracked, calling out from somewhere deep inside that wall. I didn't know what to do. I tried to dismiss it, tried to tell myself it was nothing, but it kept going. Tap, tap, tap. Then the voice again, but this time it was louder, more urgent. Dano, it's cold in here. Please, let me out. I tried to pull myself together, but the sweat was slick on my skin. I shoved the pillow over my ears, hoping it would stop. But it didn't. It only grew louder. Tap, tap, tap. Let me out, Dano. I could hear the weight of it, the desperation, the suffocating fear that seemed to choke the air in the room. I tried to get up, but my legs felt like they were made of lead. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. There was something behind that wall, something trapped, something old, something calling to me. I don't know how long I stayed like that, eyes wide open in the dark, listening to the relentless knocking and the pleading voice. Time didn't seem to pass. Everything was frozen in the heavy air of that room. Finally, in the early morning hours, I couldn't take it anymore. I threw the covers off, grabbed my bag, and bolted out the door. I didn't bother with checkout. Just ran down the stairs and back into the cab of my rig. I couldn't get out of there fast enough. But something about the place haunted me. Something gnawed at me, pulling me back to that motel years later. The Sunset Inn was still there, just as run down, the neon light flickering like it was about to die. I pulled into the lot, wondering if maybe I could find some answer to the madness I'd experienced. When I walked inside, a young girl was behind the counter. No Velma this time. I asked about room 209. She blinked at me. Room 209? She repeated, confused. There's no room 209? I pointed to the fire escape plan behind the counter. The faded paper had a clear layout of the motel. 210 and 208 were on opposite ends of the second floor, but in the middle, room 209, right where the knocking had come from. It's been sealed off, she said, wrinkling her nose. A long time ago. There's no key, no door. Nobody goes in there. I didn't argue. I didn't ask for details. I just left. Got back in my truck and hit the road again. But I'll never forget the flickering light, the sound of the knocking behind that wall. The voice. Dano, let me out. And maybe, just maybe, there's still something in room 209. Something that's waiting for someone like me to come back. It was one of those long, cold winters in Nome, Alaska, the kind that seemed to stretch out forever, where even the nights felt like they went on for days. The snow, piled high and heavy, buried everything beneath a thick blanket of white. It muffled the world, made every sound softer, duller. And it was in that kind of silence that the strange things began to happen. Maggie always thought that the house they rented on the outskirts of town was too big for just the two of them. But it was all she could afford. The rent was cheap, and the landlord was desperate to get someone in. It had been built in the 1960s, a simple two-story house with faded green siding and windows that always seemed to fog up no matter how high she turned the heat. The roof sloped sharply, a perfect place for the snow to settle and pile, heavy with the weight of Alaska's winter. At first, the sounds on the roof were nothing more than a trick of the wind. Maggie told herself that. She had to. The first night it was light, like something small was shuffling across the roof, quick, almost skittering. The second night it was louder, like something had stepped in the snow and didn't care about, leaving a trail. By the third night it was unmistakable. Tiny feet, soft, pattering footsteps, too small to belong to an animal and too light to be a person. Maggie had been a single mother for years. She didn't get easily spooked, didn't scare easily. She grew up in the rough parts of Chicago before moving to Nome with her daughter Emily, hoping the quiet of the Alaskan wilderness would offer them a fresh start. But that silence, always so comforting in the beginning, started to feel oppressive, like it was hiding something just beyond reach. Emily, at 9 years old, wasn't afraid either, but she could hear it too. The sounds that kept them both awake at night, the little steps that moved slowly across the roof above their bedroom. Tap, 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 scratching, a light thudding as if something or someone was running its hands along the shingles. Sometimes it stopped for a moment, then started again, moving from one side of the roof to the other. The first time Maggie had gone up to check, she'd thought she saw something in the snow. Tiny, almost delicate handprints beneath the attic vent. She stared at them for a long moment, not sure whether her mind was playing tricks on her. But the prints were there, clear as day, no bigger than a child's hands. But why would there be prints up there? Who? What could be climbing the roof in the middle of winter? She didn't tell Emily that night. Instead, she locked the windows and crawled into bed beside her daughter, hoping the sounds would stop, but they didn't. Every night, like clockwork, the footsteps continued. Tap, 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 scratching. The sound of something small, delicate, almost like the shifting of a child's slippered feet across an old wooden floor. By the time the fifth night came, Maggie couldn't take it anymore. Emily had started asking about the sounds. Her daughter, normally so full of curiosity, had grown pale. She would sit up in bed listening, her face tight with fear. "Mom?" Emily whispered one night, her voice shaking. "Who's up there?" "I don't know, honey," Maggie answered, but her voice wavered too. "There's nothing to worry about." But they both knew that wasn't true. There was something on the roof, and it wasn't an animal. It wasn't the wind. Maggie decided to take action. She bundled up, pulling on her thickest winter jacket and boots, and grabbed the flashlight. She wasn't going to sit in the dark any longer. She was going to find out what it was. No more wondering. She pulled the ladder out from the shed, the snow crunching beneath her boots as she set it against the side of the house. She felt the cold nip at her skin as she climbed, the wind biting at her face. But it didn't matter. She was determined. At the top of the ladder, Maggie peered over the edge of the roof, the wind howling in her ears. The moonlight illuminated the snow, casting a strange shadow on the attic vent. There, just below it, was a small patch of snow. That was disturbed. The edges were smudged, the surface disturbed, like something small had been standing there. Maggie's breath caught in her throat. There were more handprints, more tiny, delicate prints all over the snow. And then she saw it. At the edge of the vent, just beyond the roof, a small figure stood, no taller than Emily, wearing what looked like a tattered coat made of fur. It had long, scraggly hair that blew in the wind like seaweed in the tide. Its face was pale, almost sickly white, and its eyes were wide and round, reflecting the light of the moon like two dark pits. It was staring at her. Maggie froze. The little creature's mouth opened, stretching into a grin, wide, impossibly wide. It didn't speak. It just stood there, its hands clutching the edge of the vent. The thing didn't move, but Maggie could feel its presence crawling up her spine, a coldness that radiated deep into her bones. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. Before Maggie could react, The creature darted back into the dark of the roof, disappearing without a sound. The footsteps stopped. The silence returned. Maggie stumbled back down the ladder, her heart pounding in her chest. She rushed inside, locked the door, and grabbed Emily, holding her close. They didn't speak. Neither of them needed to. They both knew the thing was out there, on the roof, and it wasn't alone. In the days that followed, Maggie tried to rationalize what she had seen. Maybe it was a hallucination, brought on by the isolation and the cold. Maybe she had imagined the whole thing, but Emily had stopped sleeping altogether. Every night she would sit by the window, staring out into the night, listening to the sound of footsteps on the roof. Tiny feet, soft as whispers. And sometimes, when the snow was freshly fallen, Maggie would find more handprints beneath the vent. The little feet would never stop, and Maggie knew that one day they would be the ones knocking at the door. It began with the clinking. At first, Jeremy thought it was just the house settling. He'd lived in the old Victorian in Camden for all of his 17 years, and the place had its quirks. Doors that creaked for no reason. Pipes that rattled when the faucet wasn't even turned on. The house was ancient, built long before his grandparents had moved in, and it had its own rhythm, so when he started hearing the clinking under the floorboards, he didn't think much of it at first. Probably rats, he told himself. His mom had always said there were rats in the walls. Not exactly comforting, but it was an excuse he could live with. But then it got louder. The clinking turned into something more rhythmic, like a tool being dragged across the floorboards, a slow, deliberate tapping. He'd hear it late at night, long after everyone else had gone to bed. He'd lie, there in the darkness of his room, staring at the ceiling, the sound invading his thoughts like an unwelcome guest. At first it was soft, barely noticeable, like a distant rattle in the walls. But it didn't stop, and it didn't move like a rat. It wasn't random. It was too consistent, too purposeful. Jeremy decided to investigate. His mom was working the late shift at the hospital. His little sister was asleep, and the house was still except for that insistent clinking. Armed with a flashlight, Jeremy slipped from his room, tiptoed down the hallway, and crouched beside the floorboards. He pressed his ear to the wooden planks, hoping to catch a glimpse of whatever was causing the noise. For a few moments there was silence. Then the clinking returned, closer this time. No longer just beneath the floor, but underneath him, crawling through the old crawl space that ran beneath the entire house. The sound was unmistakable, a dragging, like something was crawling on its stomach, dragging itself through the tight space. It was slow and methodical, like it was savoring each inch of movement. The floor creaked under the weight. The sound sent a cold shiver down Jeremy's spine. No rats, no mice. Nothing natural about it. Jeremy's mind raced. He backed away from the floorboards, almost stumbling. He couldn't ignore it anymore. It wasn't just a random noise, it was deliberate. Someone or something was under the house. Maybe it's just a raccoon, he muttered to himself, trying to talk some sense into his racing thoughts. He grabbed his phone and pulled up the camera app. Maybe he could catch the thing on video. That way, he could prove to his mom there was something in the crawl space. He'd been hearing it for weeks now. It wasn't normal. He set up the phone in the corner of his room, angled perfectly to point at the floor near the corner where the clinking had originated. He turned off the lights and crawled back into bed, pretending to sleep, hoping the noise would start again. His heart pounded as he tried to steady his breath. He didn't even know why he was so terrified. Maybe it was the unknown that scared him. The thought of something moving under his house, unseen, was unsettling in a way he couldn't explain. The clinking started again, slowly, as though it had been waiting for him to be still, to lower his guard. A soft scrape, then the unmistakable sound of a slow crawl, like fingers dragging across the wood beneath the floorboards. Tap, tap, tap. Jeremy's blood ran cold. He pressed the blanket to his mouth, trying to muffle the sound of his own panicked breathing. Tap, tap, tap. Each tap felt louder than the last. The house creaked and groaned as the thing beneath the floor moved closer. His phone buzzed. The camera app had picked up the sound. In the dark, Jeremy pulled it out and opened the video feed. He wasn't sure what he was expecting, but it wasn't this. The feed was dark. At first it just showed an empty corner of his room, the light barely illuminating the edges of the floor. Then, just as Jeremy began to think it was a glitch, something appeared on the screen. A shadow, a shape that was crawling beneath the floorboards, moving in the dark like a parasite. It was a man, not a rat, not a raccoon, a man. He was hunched, impossibly thin, his body dragging across the floor, his arms extended like claws, fingers scraping and scraping against the wood. His clothes were torn, filthy rags that clung to his skeletal frame. But it was his face that froze Jeremy's heart. The man's face was pale, hollowed out like a corpse that had been left too long in the sun. His eyes were wide open, empty black voids as if they were staring directly at Jeremy, even though the man's face was angled down, his mouth inches from the floor. His mouth, wide and slack, was moving. Jeremy's stomach turned. The man was whispering something. At first, the words were too soft to understand, but then, just as the camera caught a flicker of his lips, Jeremy heard it. His blood ran cold. "Jeremy!" the man whispered, his voice ragged, like something long dead, pulled up from the depths of the earth. "Jeremy! I'm here!" The camera buzzed, flickering as the man's face seemed to draw closer to the screen. Jeremy bolted from the bed, running down the hall into his mother's room. He shook her awake, his hands trembling. "Mom, you have to come! There's someone under the house!" he gasped, his voice choking with panic. His mother groggily rubbed her eyes, trying to make sense of what he was saying. "What are you talking about? You've been hearing things again. It's probably nothing." No, Jeremy's voice cracked. "It's a man. He's under the floorboards, and he's whispering my name." They went down to the living room together, his mom skeptical but humoring him. He grabbed the phone and showed her the video. It was still playing. But the man in the crawlspace wasn't whispering just Jeremy's name anymore. The words came in a slow, almost rhythmic chant, repeating each name. Jeremy, Carla, Lorraine. Jeremy's mother froze, her face draining of color. Those were the names of everyone who lived in the house. I don't understand," she whispered, looking at Jeremy. "There's no one under the house," but as the words escaped her lips, the clinking returned. Louder now, closer. The house began to shake, the walls groaning under the pressure, and as they both stood there, eyes wide, they heard the whisper again, this time louder than ever. "Help me," the man moaned, his voice echoing from beneath the floorboards. "I'm still here, under your house. Help me." That was when they heard it, the scraping of fingers on wood, slowly, almost lovingly. A figure emerged from beneath the floorboards. A man, but not a man anymore. His eyes were still black, his face pale, and his lips stretched into a twisted grin. He crawled into the light, slowly, dragging himself toward them. And in that moment, Jeremy realized something terrifying. The man wasn't there to hurt them. He had been waiting for them to find him. Maggie had always thought of herself as someone with a steady hand. She'd worked the night shift at Gallup Care Facility for 5 years, tending to the elderly, the sick, the broken souls who spent their last days under the flickering fluorescent lights. She was used to the sounds of the midnight shift, the constant beep of monitors, the shuffle of rubber-soled shoes across the linoleum floor, the soft hum of the ventilation system. She had become one with the night, a shadow among the shadows. But there was something else that clung to the night too, something darker. It started off small, a flicker in the corner of her eye, a hesitation in the flickering lights. And then there was the clock. Every night, at exactly 3:13 a.m., every clock in the building would stop. The digital readouts froze. The analog hands froze in place, frozen, at that exact time, 3:13 a.m. It wasn't an accident. It wasn't a power surge. Maggie knew that for sure. She'd checked the wiring, reset the clocks, even called the repairman. Nothing was ever out of order, not physically, yet the clocks would freeze. It was a curiosity at first, something she could laugh about on the phone with her friends between shifts. She'd even made a joke about it once, standing at the nurse's station with her coworker Emma, watching. The minute hand grind to a halt at precisely 3:13. "Maybe it's the dead hour," Maggie had laughed, shaking her head. "Maybe the ghosts come out." Emma had laughed too, but her smile didn't reach her eyes. She was a veteran nurse, like Maggie, but had seen too many things in her career that couldn't be explained away by science. She just smiled and moved on, focusing on her duties, but Maggie noticed it wasn't just the clocks that were stopping, it was the patients. At 3:13 a.m. there would be a shift. A subtle shift in the air. A silence that felt heavier than it should. She would check her patients, and just before she turned the corner of the hall to find them, they would always stop breathing. Not in the dramatic way you'd expect, with gasps or gurgles, but like a light being snuffed out. The body just still. It didn't matter if the patient was on the brink of death or seemed perfectly stable, they would always die at exactly 3:13. Could be coincidence, she had told herself, until it happened again. Her name was Mrs. Mayfield. She'd been battling cancer for months, withered down to almost nothing but skin and bone, a fragile husk of a woman who spent most of her time in a drug stupor. But that night, 3:13 a.m., her breathing just stopped. Maggie had been sitting at the desk, flipping through her chart, her eyes heavy, when the clock had frozen in front of her. Then the sudden quiet. She had rushed into Mrs. Mayfield's room, but it was too late. Just like that, the old woman had passed. Maggie's heart had pounded. It wasn't the first death she'd witnessed, and it wasn't the most difficult one, but this time, there was a sickening weight to it. The whole facility seemed to hold its breath, like it had been waiting for that moment, but it didn't stop there. The next night, another patient, Mr. Jacobs, a man in his 80s with a heart condition. Just like Mrs. Mayfield, he had been hanging on for days, not quite improving, but not quite dying. The clock stopped at 3:13 a.m., and Maggie was sitting at the nurse's desk when it happened. She watched his heart monitor flatline. The moment the clock stopped, his heart had stopped too. She told herself again that it was a coincidence, but it didn't feel like one. The same thing had happened to every patient who died on her shift. It always began with the stillness at 3:13 a.m., followed by the final breath of someone who was meant to go. It wasn't until the third night that Maggie started to feel a chill in her spine. This time, it was different. Maggie was just finishing up her rounds, moving between rooms, when she saw it. The nurse's station camera had caught something strange. She had been curious for days, watching the feed whenever she had a free moment. The camera had a wide angle, a full view of the corridor, and tonight, when the clock had frozen at 3:13, something else appeared on the monitor. Her own face. She could see herself walking toward the end of the hall, her usual calm expression replaced by a look of dread. Her lips were moving, but no sound came out. The light above her head flickered, the shadow of her figure growing longer, stretching toward the camera like it was reaching for something. And then, the cold, the unmistakable presence of something else. Maggie had stepped closer to the screen, her hand trembling as she leaned in to get a better look. The video was grainy, but she could clearly see herself, as though she was walking towards something or someone just out of frame. Her face twisted in shock, her eyes wide, mouth agape. The time, 3:13. Her throat constricted. She knew it. knew it before she even turned to the hall and looked at the monitor again. She saw the figure standing at the far end of the hallway, half hidden in shadow. It was a man, a tall, gaunt figure with a face she couldn't quite see. His features were obscured, a blur in the darkness, but she could make out his eyes. They were wide, too wide, filled with an unnatural blackness that made her skin crawl, as if he had been waiting for her. Suddenly the image cut to static. Maggie froze. A cold sweat broke out across her forehead. She couldn't breathe. Someone was standing in the hall just beyond the reach of the light. She could hear it now, a low hum like static on a TV. Then the sound of footsteps. 1, 2, 3. But there was no one there. And then, the worst thing of all, she saw her own face again, in the reflection of the window. But this time, it wasn't the face she recognized. Her eyes were sunken, hollow, her skin pale and gray, as though death had already taken its toll. She watched in disbelief as her own reflection, her own image, grinned at her. Her mouth opened, but it wasn't her voice. The voice came from the other side of the screen. 3:13, it whispered, the words wrapping around her like a cold hand, gripping her heart. "It's your time now, Maggie." And in that moment, Maggie knew. It was the hour, the dead hour. She had never been more certain of anything in her life. She wasn't just witnessing the deaths of others. She had been marked. The next morning, Maggie didn't show up for her shift. Her coworkers found the footage on the camera. They saw her walking down the hall, just like always, right before the clock hit 3:13. But she never made it out of the hallway. There was no sign of her, no explanation for where she went. The clocks never stopped again. In the sleepy suburbs of Tallahassee, the days were long and slow, the kind of place where the biggest events were the high school football games on Friday nights and the occasional neighborly dispute over a broken fence or a dog that wandered too far. The streets were quiet after dusk, and most of the families tucked in early, settling down to the gentle hum of a Florida evening. But every night, at precisely 10 p.m., something would disturb that stillness, a sound so soft, so sweet, it might have been mistaken for something nostalgic, a memory of childhood perhaps, or the soft strains of a lullaby carried on the night air. It wasn't the distant cry of a baby, but it felt like one. The faint, tinny melody floated down from the street, the kind of tune that made your skin crawl with its gentle sorrow. It came from somewhere down the block, always from the same place. The children in the neighborhood heard it first. They had been warned. Oh, they'd been warned. Their parents told them stories, the kind of stories you tell when the lights are dim and the evening feels too still. The ice cream truck that played lullabies? It was a tale older than the houses on East Belmont Street, something whispered on the wind, but never quite confirmed. The truck had been a thing of local legend, appearing at night like a shadow, a harbinger of something unspeakable. It was a story so old that no one knew its origin. There were no records, no police reports, nothing to indicate where it had come from. Yet every child in the neighborhood had heard about it, the ice cream truck, and the way it vanished. Every night, at precisely 10 p.m., the truck would arrive. A dusty old vehicle, painted a faded pink, the kind that belonged in a time long gone. Its paint was chipped, its windows cracked, but its bell, oh, that bell. When it rang, it sent a shiver down your spine, sending every child running to the front door. It was that lullaby, the one that played from the truck's antique music box, soft and sweet, but just off enough to make your heart skip a beat. "Do you hear it?" Emily whispered to her brother one night. She stood at the window, her eyes wide, her small hands gripping the edge of the sill. "I hear it," he said. "It's the ice cream truck." "But it's not time," she replied, her voice trembling. "Mom says it doesn't come until—" Her brother, Billy, was already on his feet, his sneakers slapping against the floor as he rushed toward the door. "I'll be quick," he promised, but the words hung in the air like a thin thread. Emily tried to call after him, but the door had already slammed shut. and her brother was running toward the truck, his shadow long and thin under the streetlights. The lullaby sang to him like a siren song, calling him, pulling him closer. Emily had heard the stories too, about how the truck only appeared for children, about the ones who followed it, who disappeared without a trace. Every story ended the same. They were never seen again, not a single one. She raced to the door, her hands trembling as she tried to unlock it, but by the time she got outside, Billy was already gone, his small figure vanishing into the dark. The lullaby was louder now, echoing in her ears, a distorted, repeating melody that felt wrong in ways she couldn't explain. She stood frozen, staring at the truck in the distance. It was parked on the corner, its engine idling, its back door open. The faint silhouette of Billy stood just beside it, looking back at her with an odd, dreamy expression on his face. "Billy!" she screamed. Her voice cracked like glass. But he didn't answer. He didn't even look back. Before she could take a step, the truck door slammed shut with a sound that was far too loud for the stillness of the night. The lullaby stopped. The silence that followed was deep, unnatural. Then, as if on cue, the truck began to roll away, slowly at first, and then faster, moving toward the next street. She ran after it, her heart pounding. But by the time she reached the corner, it was gone, vanished into the night. And Billy was gone too. The next day, the neighborhood was quiet. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that pressed down on you, made the air feel thick. Emily couldn't find her brother. She searched the house, the yard, the whole block. No one had seen him since the night before. Her mother was frantic, calling the police, but no one could explain it. No one had seen the truck. No one had seen Billy. The only thing left behind was a single black balloon tied to the mailbox at the corner of East Belmont Street, right where the ice cream truck had parked. It was an eerie thing, that balloon. Its dark color was so deep it seemed to absorb the light. The string was frayed, like it had been there for days, if not longer. Emily's mother called the police again, but there was nothing they could do. Billy was gone, and as the days stretched on, the other children in the neighborhood began to disappear too. Every time, it was the same. The lullaby, the ice cream truck, and the black balloon. Weeks passed, and the streets of the neighborhood became emptier, quieter. The truck never came again, at least not for the adults. But every night Emily would stand at her window, watching, listening. And just as the clock struck 10 p.m., she'd hear the faintest sound, almost like the wind rustling the trees. But she knew it was the lullaby, playing in the distance, calling to the children. Sometimes, when she stared long enough, she'd see a shadow by the corner, and she would wonder if Billy was out there, waiting, just as the others had waited. And then she'd hear the sound again, a soft whisper on the wind. "Come find me, Emily." But Emily had learned, in the most terrifying way possible, that the ice cream truck only came for children, and the children who followed it were never seen again, leaving behind only the echo of a lullaby and a single, dark balloon. The house on Silver Oak Road was nothing like what Jenny and Mark had imagined when they first saw the listing. They had envisioned a charming farmhouse, a slice of rustic Americana with weathered wood and ivy crawling up the sides like something from a picture book. What they found, when they drove out to Ojai on that crisp autumn day, was much older. The farmhouse was sturdy, its bones solid, but it had a history, a weight to it, that made it feel older than the century it had stood. The front porch sagged in places, and the windows, though grand, looked as though they hadn't been washed in decades. It was perfect for what they needed, a fresh start. Their son Leo was 6 years old, a boy full of energy and imagination, the kind who could turn a cardboard box into a rocket ship or a broomstick into a horse. Jenny hoped that the wide-open space of the house and the surrounding orchards would give him room to run and explore. She envisioned him playing among the fruit trees, laughing with the sound of the breeze in the leaves. But what happened wasn't quite what she expected. The first sign was small. Leo had begun talking about someone he called The Boy in the Mirror. At first, Jenny thought it was just the product of an overactive imagination. Children that age were prone to imaginary friends, or so she'd read in her parenting books. But Leo was insistent. He would sit in front of the large ornate mirror in the hallway and chat away, his face alight with excitement, his words a mixture of nonsense and casual conversation. "I'm playing with him, Mommy," Leo would say, his bright blue eyes wide with wonder. "He likes it when I make faces." Jenny would smile, ruffling his hair. "What kind of faces?" Leo would pull his face into an exaggerated frown, then grin, his lips stretching wide. "The boy in the mirror," he'd explain, always copied him. It wasn't until Leo started making up stories about the boy, stories that didn't make any sense, that Jenny's smile started to falter. "He's lonely," Leo would say, staring into the mirror as though the boy were right there beside him. "He doesn't have anyone to play with." "Who is he, Leo?" Mark asked one evening, leaning against the doorframe of the hallway. He had just come home from work, his shirt still rumpled from a long day. "Where does he come from?" Leo looked up at him, his small forehead creased in thought. "He's always there, in the mirror." Then, with the simplicity of a child's logic, he added, "He's just waiting." Jenny laughed it off. It was a phase, she thought, just another quirk of childhood. But the days went by, and Leo's obsession with the boy in the mirror grew. It was no longer just innocent chatter. He'd stop whatever he was doing and stare at the reflection, his gaze fixed, unwavering. "Mom," Leo said one evening, his voice tight with confusion. "The boy, he looks different." Jenny raised an eyebrow. "Different how?" Leo's voice dropped to a whisper. "He's not like me anymore." That night, when Jenny checked on Leo before bed, she found him sitting in front of the mirror once again, his legs crossed beneath him. His hands were pressed against the glass, as though he were trying to push through it. "Leo?" Jenny asked, softly, stepping into the hallway. Leo didn't look up. His eyes were fixed on the reflection of himself and something else. The boy in the mirror, the one who had once been a mere shadow of Leo's own features, was now distinctly different. The face in the glass was darker, more defined. Its eyes, black as coal, stared back at Jenny with an unsettling awareness. The boy in the mirror had aged. Leo's voice trembled. "Mommy, he's getting bigger. I don't know why." Jenny's heart skipped. She reached out for Leo, gently guiding him away from the mirror. She tried to dismiss the unease in her stomach. "It's just your imagination, honey. It's not real." But when Jenny turned back to the mirror, her blood ran cold. The boy in the glass, now clearly older, was smiling. The grin spread unnaturally wide, stretching to an impossible degree. And for just a moment, as Jenny stared into the reflection, she could have sworn that the boy's mouth moved. "You can't keep him away from me." Jenny blinked, and when she looked back, the reflection was once again the image of her son, staring at her with wide, innocent eyes. She shook her head, disoriented. "It's just the house," she reasoned. "It's old. It's drafty. Shadows play tricks on your mind." But deep down, she knew something was wrong. The following weeks only intensified her concerns. The boy in the mirror grew older every day. His features sharpened, his face becoming more distinct and less like Leo, and Leo's behavior began to change as well. He grew quiet, withdrawn. Sometimes he would wake in the middle of the night, whispering to the mirror, his small hands gripping the edges of the frame as though he were trying to pull himself through. One night, Mark awoke to find Leo standing in front of the mirror again, his fingers pressed so hard against the glass that his knuckles were white. The boy in the reflection was no longer just older. He looked wrong. His eyes were black pits, and his grin was twisted into something grotesque. "Leo," Mark said, his voice rough with sleep, "come away from there." But Leo didn't move. His gaze was fixed, as though he were under a spell. "Leo!" Mark shouted, grabbing his son by the shoulder. But when he turned Leo away from the mirror, he realized with a sudden, terrible certainty that the boy who had just been standing there, staring back at him from the reflection, wasn't his son. The figure in the glass was tall now, gaunt, with skin so pale it almost glowed in the dark. Its grin hadn't faded. It had only grown wider. Mark's heart thudded in his chest. He turned to Leo, only to find him staring at the mirror, eyes wide and filled with terror. "It's not me," Leo whispered, his voice barely audible. "It's him. He wants to take me." In the days that followed, the boy in the mirror continued to age at an alarming rate. No matter how hard Jenny tried to avoid it, she couldn't shake the feeling that the mirror was no longer a mere reflection. It was a window into something else, a place where time worked differently, where the boy wasn't growing older because of the passage of time, but because he was stealing it from Leo. One night, after hours of frantic research, Jenny found an old diary in the attic. A diary that belonged to the farmhouse's previous owner. The last entry, written in faded ink, told the story of a boy who had died in that very house, a boy who had become trapped in the mirror and whose reflection grew older with every passing day. The entry ended with a chilling sentence: "He will take someone to join him when he's ready. When the time is right." Jenny didn't need to read any more. She knew what she had to do. She tore the mirror from the wall, her heart racing as she heard Leo's voice in the background, calling for the boy. But when she tossed it out the window, the boy's face, older, twisted, stared back at her one last time. And she knew then that no matter what she did, the boy in the mirror would always be waiting, always watching, always hungry for the next child.